welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, April 4th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and many of the stories we hear can also be found at our websites. But today we go to Fort Hall, Idaho, and we talk with correspondent Mark Trahant about the latest delegate count for the Republican primary and where we're headed. Mark Trahant, thanks for joining with us, and welcome back to the United States from your trip. You can tell us a little bit about that in a minute, but let's get into the latest. You're keeping track of the delegate count on the Republican primary, and yesterday we had, Wisconsin, and we had some other state there. Tell us what we've got here on the Republican primary results.
Last night we had Wisconsin and Maryland and the District of Columbia, and it was a sweep for Mitt Romney. So it's starting to look like the Republican establishment is saying, that's enough, let's put it away. Let's get busy and focus on the general election.
Major endorsement, about a week ago, 10 days ago, of Jeb Bush in Florida. What does that tell us?
Jeb Bush, Paul Ryan. I mean, it's just the Republican establishment is starting to coalesce and say, we don't want to let this go on any longer than it has. It's hurting the brand.
Okay. Let's ask them if they have a brand. Between Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, and Santorum, the question is what is the brand? Is it still off to the right there where Santorum is, or are we going for middle of the road a little bit? And
no, it's off to the right. And to me, what's really unbelievable they're getting away with is this. They're preaching austerity and economic growth at the same time, and the two notions are incompatible. And if you look at what's going on in Europe, which they love to run against Europe, austerity is kind of the flavor of the month with governments there. There's pretty much center or right-wing governments in virtually every European country, and they've been cutting budgets like crazy, and it's causing gross domestic product to fall. And that's a natural thing. If you look at the job creation in the United States over the last 2 years, it's all been, there's been pretty good growth in the private sector, but the reason unemployment remains so high is the cutting of government jobs. And this notion of having austerity that creates growth is just absurd. You need both.
Government becomes a job creation vehicle which stimulates tax returns just like any other job. So,
right. And it's not that it's stimulating, it's that they're cutting the hell out of government. You look at local and state governments, and the amount of permanent employees is dropping all over the country, pretty much in every jurisdiction. And that's creating a downward pressure on economic growth.
Yeah. What does Romney have left to do here? We haven't heard anything about Santorum or Gingrich dropping out, only it's becoming kind of obvious that that's what they probably ought to do, even if they don't do it formally. What is the difference between formal withdrawal? Ron Paul's in there, too, with 51 delegates. Newt Gingrich, 135. Santorum, 278. Romney's got 655. He needs 1,166. He's a little bit over halfway there. Does this pulling together of the Republican establishment behind Romney, does that simply mean that these three other candidates need to drop out, or are there other reasons they would stay in?
Well, I think Gingrich has essentially dropped out. He's still, he's just not actively campaigning. He's starting to say very nice things about Romney. Santorum is still clinging to a small hope that he can block the number of delegates that Romney needs to win on the first round of ballots at the convention. But that's becoming particularly a difficult task. Even said his next big state is in 3 weeks, his home state of Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania is really, I think, illustrative of the problem he faces, is that the elections, delegate selection process really isn't based on the primary there. It's only partly based on the primary. And even if Santorum wins, he'll end up with the same number of delegates out of Pennsylvania that Romney has. The next state after that is Texas, which is winner take all, which could help a lot. But even so, if you're 400 delegates down, having one big state isn't going to help you that much. It's pretty clear it's becoming too late to even stop him from getting to the magic number.
Okay, and that's what he would be looking for, to try to stalemate it a little bit. And Romney's looking, excuse me, Romney's looking for that magic 1,166 votes on the first round to get it done and over with.
Right.
Is there anything to potential vice presidential candidates that don't happen until the convention? But is there any fuming about what might happen in that area yet?
Well, they've started to kind of vet people and get the names out there. Sarah Palin, interesting, yesterday mentioned Florida Congressman Allen West as a possibility, who is a colonel in the military and is African American. Many people have talked about the Florida Senator Rubio, Marco Rubio. Right. It'll be an interesting process. They've got to find. One of the things that's happened in the last 3 weeks is that the polling has just gone through the floor for the Republicans in terms of women voters.
Right.
And I think they'll be looking for ways to kind of bring that back up before the general election.
All the legislation that's been in front of the Senate and Congress, and for example, they haven't renewed, at least the last I heard, they hadn't renewed this Violence Against Women Act, which seemed to be kind of a no-brainer, giving jurisdictions and programs more power to be able to deal with domestic and other kinds of violence in the community, and yet that's being held up.
It is, and that's a classic example of the problem they face. That's just going to be something that will be on the campaign trail as front and center evidence that they're out of touch with that constituency.
Well, and the question is where does Romney go to hide from the Romney Obamacare label that they put on him? Here's one person who supported health care, and it may be struck down soon, or it may be upheld soon. But how does Romney get around that?
If it is struck down, I think there's a remarkable opportunity to build the case again for actual direct government management of healthcare, and maybe in competition with the private sector. But in the 1970s, this country had a remarkable system with the Marine Public Health Hospital system. Yeah. And there are ways that could be restored without a lot of, you don't need another 20,000 page bill to make that happen.
Right. It's interesting. A lot of people don't even know about that particular health care system and how it worked. The question that I had is that, again, for example, if the bill, let's talk about the health care bill for a minute. If it's struck down, it strikes down the reauthorization for Indian health care services as well. If the entire piece of legislation falls, if it's just a mandate, they might be able to redo that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's right. Normally, when courts look at legislation like that, they try to take the narrowest of possible views of it, so they would just rule on the mandate portion, for example. This Supreme Court, all bets are off because they're just so political. In fact, normally, if it were just a court of law and not a political enterprise, they probably wouldn't even take this case at this point because most of the law does not take effect yet. And usually courts are very careful to say, when there's a real injury, bring it to the court, not before. And so you have a law that has another couple of years before it actually is implemented in many cases, and including the mandate, and yet they're considering it. So that just shows kind of prima facie evidence how politically motivated this court is.
Right. And does striking down the mandate only, does that negatively impact Obama, or does that simply say that he's attempting to try to address that issue?
Well, this is interesting because so many of the ideas in Affordable Care Act were really Republican ideas a generation ago. And that is that if you forced a mandate, it increases the size of the pool, and that allows people to, you have a problem in economics they call free rider, where a young person who's healthy doesn't pay into the system, So then only the older people who have health problems end up paying all the bills. So by bringing younger people into the system, it should be more market-based than the alternative. And the alternative is more government, which brings everybody into the system as taxpayers. I mean, all they have to do to get past any constitutional muster is change the mandate to one word and call it a tax. Even this court couldn't rule it out of bounds.
Indeed, didn't they ask that question, whether or not it was considered a tax, and there was some argument that it was some kind of a tax.
Of course it's a tax.
Right. When Romney comes out of this nomination, if he does with the Republican nomination, does he go to the center or does he lean to the right yet to keep that constituency in there? He's been under a lot of fire by the hard right. Is he ever going to be able to please them? And then the question is how does he reach to that middle a little bit?
My guess is that he'll pick somebody from the hard right to be his running mate and hope that's enough. I'm not sure the right wing will let him get away with it, but that's certainly the strategy that John McCain and others have tried. I think this election is different because if the economy continues to improve, there's really no way for Romney to win. His whole campaign premise is the terrible economy. And as the numbers keep getting stronger, that becomes more of a problem for him.
Seems to me that the Democrats have a lot of fodder in just looking at what other candidates have said about Romney for the fall election advertising cycle.
Absolutely.
Some people say Wisconsin is going to be kind of a weather vane on what's going on with the Tea Party agenda in the United States, in part because that whole agenda is under attack after being implemented. The union busting bill, we've had we've had a federal court issue 2 injunctions against voter ID. We've had a federal court strike down portions of the union busting bill. We had 930,000 signatures submitted for recall and a little over 900,000 certified for that recall. It's happening. It's coming up on May 5th with a primary and May 8th with a primary and then June 5th for a new governor. Does Scott Walker fit into this formula? Do you see him fitting into this formula on the national scene?
Absolutely. Wisconsin is extraordinarily important. And the Scott Walker recall is a good test case, but it's important that those that want to see the country shift directions toward where Obama's going can't let that be the end. They've got to pick it up and do not just one election, but 2 elections, because the Democrats really need to carry Wisconsin in the fall. It's an important state. And so the pressure's got to be sustained from now through November.
That'll be interesting. All right, Mark. Well, thanks. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Tell me in the last minute you have here, how was your trip to Italy?
It was fantastic. I'm working on a book on austerity and got a lot done, got about 4 chapters written. So I hope to have it done by this summer so we can have it part of the election discussion. And I'm planning on doing it as an electronic book, so it'll be very inexpensive, maybe $1.99 or so, and hopefully easy to get.
Oh, sounds good. And in the meantime, you're going to start rewriting your column and those kinds of things?
Probably not right away until I get more done on the book.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll look forward to it.
Sounds good.
Take care, Mark. Thanks for joining with us.
Okay.
And that's another roundup of news from Indian Country. On this edition of the Native News Update, we want to thank you for joining with us and come back again soon.